All right. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 7, which will lead us into one of the most influential articles in moral psychology, which is Haidt's article on his social intuitionist model. So chapter 7, broadly speaking, is on the debate between sentimentalism and rationalism. So yesterday's article helped pave the way for this. So sentimentalism, broadly speaking, is the view that moral judgments are based on emotions. And rationalism, as we saw last class, different versions of this, but that's the view that moral judgments are based on reason. So the chapter starts off with what you could construe as a potential problem for sentimentalism, which is that moral judgments seem to be different from judgments based purely on emotions. So think about the judgment that such and such is an ugly painting. That seems like a pretty clear case of something that's based on emotion, in that case maybe disgust or something else. And then take the judgment that child sex slavery is wrong. These are very different sorts of judgments. At a minimum, they're different in terms of the types of actions you'll take to back these things up. I'm not going to beat someone up for having a different view on a painting, whereas I might, or hopefully would, in the other case. So a sentimentalist is going to have to say that the difference is one of degree, though, in that both are ultimately matters of emotion. It's just that maybe the moral one is stronger, or you're willing to engage in different sorts of actions to defend it, and maybe some other differences that we'll get to. Yes?
So sentimentalism is claiming that moral judgments are purely based on emotions, rather than like a mix of rational.
That's a good question. I don't know. I suspect there'd be different accounts. I think at a minimum they're going to have to say primarily. There's some caveats we'll see throughout the chapter, but as far as the definition that you're going to write in the test, if it's on there, just based on emotion. You don't have to give a percentage or something like that. Here's another way of presenting a problem for the sentimentalist. Think about the following two judgments. Kale is disgusting, and kale is healthy. And you could do tasty or unhealthy for different examples. I don't care about the positive, negative difference, but the difference in terms of can you give reasons for these judgments. In the first case, this is again a paradigm case of a purely sentimental or emotion-based judgment. To say that kale is disgusting is just to say it tastes bad to me. If someone said why, you'd probably be at a loss for words. You couldn't articulate reasons why that you could argue about. If someone else likes the taste of kale, there's really no way of settling the difference. Whereas if you say kale is healthy, that's the kind of judgment for which you can give reasons. Right? You can explain why you think that and have an argument about it. So this is our first discussion topic. So moral judgments are not exactly like either of these, but with regard to whether or not you can give reasons for your moral judgments, who thinks that moral judgments are more like the first kind? You can't give reasons for them. Minority. Who thinks it's more like this one, where you can give reasons? So a majority. Okay, so this is our first discussion topic. Why did you answer as you did? Are moral judgments the kinds of judgments for which you can give reasons or argue about? So discuss with the people around you.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, some groups have gone a bit quiet. Maybe we'll bring it back. So what are some thoughts that different groups had? Anyone want to volunteer an argument on either side? Yep.
I don't really have a reason, but every moral line in the sand that I can think of, I do have a logical reason.
Oh, I think that definitely counts as a reason. So, I mean, it's a sample size of one, but you're saying, yeah, in my case, when I think of my own moral beliefs, I usually do have reasons for them. Okay, so that's a good point, yeah.
I think for any moral claim, at a basis, it has to be based on an intuition. Kind of like when you're thinking with the Sam Harris example, you can make this big argument about all the reasons that this is the worst thing for everyone. You still need the intuition that if you're not a psychopath, you will probably have that it feels bad.
Good, so what you're saying is you can put on a show of giving these reasons, giving these arguments, but when you dig down to the bottom, ultimately it's based on an emotion or, you know, the fact that you're not a psychopath. Okay, good? Yep.
We kind of talked about it in terms of reflective equilibrium.
Yep.
Like you kind of, I guess it kind of piggybacks off of what the other person said, that you have your intuitions and then you posit your principles and then that's kind of your reason for chaos being healthy.
Good, so what the answers are kind of converging on is at least part of what the solution is that this section on sentimentalism is going to offer. The so most of you raised your hand for, it's sort of more similar to this. And I think that's right. Clearly it's the case that at least sometimes we engage in moral reasoning, moral debate. So the book says that, you know, people at least claim they sometimes change their mind for reasons. They hear an argument, they think about it, maybe with time they change their view on a moral topic. And I think the sentimentalist has to absorb that in some way, even though they're going to have to grant, as the second question said, that at bottom it is ultimately a matter of emotion. Now, the book mentions in passing that Haidt, who we're going to spend a lot of time on today, is going to say that most of the time when we think we're engaging in moral reasoning, that's a kind of illusion. Really, we're just being lawyers. We're just defending our moral intuitions post hoc. So that's going to be something he's going to argue for. So how does the sentimentalist strike this balance between, on the one hand, maintaining that moral judgments are a matter of emotion or preference, and on the other hand, maintaining that we can, in some sense, reason about them? So last class, or maybe the class before, I mentioned reflective equilibrium as one way to think about that, where even if the intuitive judgments are a matter of emotion, you can still posit principles to explain them and then engage in a reasoning process. So that's one tool that the sentimentalist has. So I think in the key terms I say, you know, you can reason about moral judgments even if they are at bottom sentiments. So that would be the idea. Even if the judgments are based on emotion, you can still try to make them consistent with each other. Yes?
Is that in some ways similar to a system like logic for language, where you kind of subjectively choose some basis to start with, then it allows you to create a system where you can reason?
Yeah, so there's an analogy there. So on one account of something like logic or mathematics, what people are doing is they endorse certain axioms. So math has certain axioms, logic has certain axioms, like you can't contradict yourself. Once you endorse those axioms, then you can logically deduce other things. I wouldn't be inclined to say that endorsing those axioms is a matter of emotion. That might be a difference between logic and morality, but there is a kind of analogy there. So that's one resource. Another resource is second order attitudes. I just realized, I think I had a video of this. Maybe I have it later. And maybe it's later. So a second order attitude is an attitude about an attitude. So a first order attitude might be like, I think meat is tasty. You know, so that's an attitude I have towards meat. A second order attitude might be, I don't like that I find meat tasty. You know, given principles I'm committed to about the welfare of animals or what have you, I don't approve of my like of meat. So this can lead to a kind of contradiction between different attitudes that you have. and then reason can have the job of making them consistent. So someone can reason their way to vegetarianism, for example, because on the one hand, they like meat, but they have this second order attitude that, well, because I care about animals, I don't want to like meat. And reason can help you arrive at principles for deciding between them. So before we move on to Haidt, the book also has a section on Kant. Some of this is review. So remember that for Kant, he thought that you could arrive at moral principles purely through the use of reason. So he's opposed to people like Hume. So Hume is a sentimentalist, right? He thinks that it is at bottom a matter of preference or emotion. And the way that you decide which principles to endorse for Kant is universalizability. Nice big word. So the idea here is you look at different candidate moral principles and you ask, are they universalizable? Meaning, can I consistently endorse them? And can I do so without contradicting myself? The example I used in passing back in Unit 1, this is the easiest one to understand. You're deciding what your principles should be with regard to lying. And what Kant says is, you cannot consistently will or wish that everyone lie all the time without contradicting yourself. So the principle always lie is not universalizable, whereas the principle always tell the truth is. Now, you don't have to buy that argument, but according to Kant, you can arrive at the right moral principles using this standard. The way that some modern Kantians put it is, can you reflectively endorse the principles? Now, so in other words, can you, upon reflection, say, yes, these principles that I've arrived at, I endorse? Okay, so, oh, yeah.
Sorry, question. So what would happen then with the universalizability if I think about something like telling the truth as being morally right, but a situation comes up where if I tell the truth, somebody else suffers?
Exactly, so this
Does that mean that it's not moral to?
Yes, so what Kant would say, Kant would bite the bullet, as we say in philosophy. Bite the bullet means you accept the unpleasant implication of your view and say that even if you're lying to save someone's life, it's wrong. So in debates about utilitarianism versus Kant or deontology, usually the Kantians will bring up things like, well, what if you torture someone in front of 100 people, 100 psychopaths, and they all get really happy? Do you endorse that? And the utilitarian has to go, I guess it's a way of making them feel uncomfortable. The way of making Kant feel uncomfortable, or a Kantian, is what if you're lying to save someone's life? And if Kant is going to stick to his guns, he's going to have to say, yes, that's wrong. Good point. Good question. Okay, so that's the. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Isn't that kind of a problem? Because couldn't you make like the most silly hypothetical case of like telling the tiniest lie to save somebody's life, and then that's still.
Oh, I think it's a huge problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a Kantian, so it's not a problem for me. But yes, it is a problem. Okay, so that's the. Any other questions? So that's kind of the philosophical background of this debate. So then Jonathan Haidt comes onto the scene, and this is the same Jonathan Haidt who came up with the 5 moral foundations. So as I said, in that section, Haidt is probably one of the 2 most important living moral psychologists. The other is maybe Joshua Green, who we'll spend a lot of time talking about in Unit 3. So, Haidt wrote this very famous paper called The Emotional Dog and Its Rational Tail, a Social Intuitionist Approach to Moral Judgment. So the idea here is emotions or intuitions are the dog and reason is the tail. So when we give reasons for our moral judgment, we're just defending what we already hold as a matter of intuition. We do not primarily use reason to arrive at our moral judgments. We use them to defend the judgments we already have. So he would be very much on the sentimentalist side of the debate, but he's bringing empirical evidence to bear on it, not just pure philosophy. This brings us to our next discussion topic. This is one of the most famous thought experiments in moral psychology, probably behind the trolley problem. It's a bit of a weird case, but it will help illustrate Haidt's argument. So here's the situation. Julie and Mark are brother and sister. They go on a camping trip, and they decide it would be fun if they made love. Julie is already on the pill, and they use a condom just to be extra sure. They just do it once. I'm already seeing how some of you are going to respond to this. And they feel it brings them closer together, and they decide to never do it again. It's a little secret between them. So, based on the look on your faces, I can tell you all, and I agree, of course, this is pretty weird. But the question is it morally wrong? So, show of hands, who thinks yes, it is morally wrong? Who thinks no, it's not? Brave. Okay. Well, I'll say, I think I agree, so although I shouldn't give my own. So you can all discuss, and the vast majority, except for one of you, said that it is morally wrong. Why is it morally wrong? So give reasons for your moral judgment. Okay, it's getting a bit quiet again, so I'll open it up. What did different groups come up with? And I shouldn't have shared my opinion up front, but I didn't want the one person to feel bad.
So you guys defend myself?
Yeah, okay.
Just because I don't think it's wrong doesn't mean I endorse it.
No, say. I mean, I think we all, based on the look in your faces, all think this is pretty messed up. But the question we're asking is it morally wrong? So yes, obviously, I also think it's messed up. But what are some reasons that different people came up with? Yep.
I mean, now when we kind of talk about it, I see it not being a moral value because I feel like it's more of like a social norm that we kind of confide in and we just like know it's wrong because we're told it's wrong, but no one actually like morally says it, but it's just like, that's weird.
Yeah, well, so you will be a counterexample to Haidt, who says we don't reason our way out of our moral judgments. But any other thoughts that groups have?
The
Yeah.
only like logical reason-ish I could think of was that you're putting like a future life potentially in it. Like you're putting a lot of faith in contraception because that goes really. It's not good for anybody involved if contraception doesn't work.
Yeah, so that's one that people often jump to, and it's sort of set up so that you can rule that out because they're on the pill and the condom. So the chances of a child resulting from it are pretty small, but it is a consideration the book brings up at a later point. But yep.
I think if you're going to consider it morally wrong, you need to also believe in some kind of more transcendent moral principle for the world. Like
Maybe, well, I don't know if you need to. I mean, you could be a sentimentalist and say, look, moral norms are just things that I, upon reflection, endorse. And then the question is, okay, do we think that this kind of action is morally wrong? Yep.
Something that my partner brought up that I thought was a really good point was that if it is like only wrong because of like pregnancy, then what if it's like two brothers? Like then is it fine?
Yeah, exactly. So that's another example people bring up. What about two brothers? Now, some people may think homosexuality is wrong in any case, but if you don't think that, then that's an even better argument because it's like, well, then there's zero chance of, pregnancy resulting from it. So I heard one group give one reason. I heard someone say, ew, and then not follow it up. Well, that's fair enough. This is the example that I use actually in intro to distinguish approximate and evolutionary explanations. As most of you probably know, the evolutionary reason for our aversion to it is that it tends to result in birth defects. But that doesn't mean at the conscious level you're all thinking, yes, I should not mate with my sister because it will decrease my chance of spreading my genes. What you think is just, yeah, ew. So what I think many of you will see from this is consistent with Haidt's view, that it's emotion or kind of visceral reaction that drives moral judgment, and the reasons come after. When I described this story, most of you probably did not engage in moral reasoning. You just had a reaction to it, like, oh, that's just wrong. And then when I ask you, you can give reasons, but those aren't why you have the judgment. And so I'll show a video of Haidt talking about this. So what he would do is bring people into the lab, give them this story, and ask them why it's wrong. They would give different reasons, and the graduate student giving the dilemma, or the story, I guess, would knock down all of the reasons. So they say birth defects, the grad student says, well, they can know for sure that won't happen. They go through all the others. And eventually, participants will engage in what Haidt calls moral dumbfounding. And it's not meant to be pejorative. It just means they say, yep, you've knocked down all my reasons for thinking this is wrong, but I don't care, it's just wrong. I don't care if I can't give a reason for it. That's just messed up, and I reject it. So we'll actually see some footage of a real case of this. Not of the Julian Mark, but of a participant in this. Okay, so he explained a bit of his model. Put that back down, because I'll be showing the picture of his model in a second. So he shows a video of a participant in the study who had the judgment that most of you had. He gives various reasons. They're knocked down, but he stands with the judgment nonetheless. Okay, so in the paper, Haidt distinguishes between the rationalist model of moral judgment and the social intuitionist one. So here's the rationalist model. So there's the eliciting situation that causes you to have a moral judgment. The way that you form a judgment is primarily through reasoning. Now, there may still be emotions at play that feed into your reasoning, but the reasoning is the ultimate decider, to quote the philosopher George Bush. It's the decider of what you think, and then you form the judgment. This is Haidt's model, so there's a few more pieces here. So there's the eliciting situation, so in this case the description of Julie and Mark, and you have an intuitive gut reaction. That's just no. On that basis you form the judgment. That's morally wrong. And then if asked, you can give reasons. And the reason that he thinks that comes after is the evidence of moral dumbfounding. Even if you rule out their reasons, so you say, well, I think that's wrong just because it's so repulsive. And they say, well, what if some people may find gay sex to be repulsive just from looking at it, but that wouldn't show that it's morally wrong. And they go, yeah, okay, I guess that's right. So what that shows is the reason they gave isn't really why they hold the judgment. Now, as he says in the video, he does have two dotted lines here. So Haidt has to begrudgingly admit that occasionally reason can change the judgment. He just thinks it's rare. He thinks that what's more likely to work, as far as a means of your mind being changed, is other people arguing with you. We're too caught up in our own sort of confirmation bias for moral judgment that we need other people to reason with us. So that's why it's called the social intuitionist model. There's a kind of analogy with science, right? Many people have argued that science is supposed to work like this. We teach you all in intro courses that scientists are supposed to be open-minded, skeptical, and trying to prove ourselves wrong, like Karl Popper taught us. But in practice, scientists are human beings who like their theories and try to prove them right, so we need other people, other scientists, to try to prove our theories wrong. Any questions about the basics of the model? Another way of thinking about it, and this is a metaphor that Haidt uses, both in his talks and in the paper, is we reason more like lawyers than we do like scientists. At least the kind of cartoon version of what scientists are like. In practice, scientists often do this too, but think about what a lawyer's job is. A lawyer's job is not to impartially search for the truth, right? If you're a defense attorney, your job is to try to prove your client is innocent. And lawyers aren't dumb people. I mean, I'm sure some are, but in general, like, they're smart people. They had years and years of schooling, and what they're good at is defending the conclusion they've already decided to defend. And Haidt thinks that when it comes to morality, that's primarily what we do. Our intuition is like our client, and reasoning is like our lawyer. In the video, he used a similar analogy of the press secretary, right? The press secretary is there to defend the administration, not to discover what the right policy is. So we're not like the cartoon version of scientists that are impartially trying to just search for the truth. I think that's not what we do. So I'll just go through a few different things in the article. So as he mentioned in passing in the video, Hume has a famous quote that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, meaning reason serves the emotions. Emotions are what give the goal, reason figures out how to get them. Haidt kind of extends this to even forming moral judgments in the first place. It's the emotions that give them to us, reason is just there to defend them. This is, now this paper's somewhat old now, it came out in 2001. At the time, it was a kind of rebellion. At the time, people like Kohlberg were more influential, and recall that for Kohlberg, the most mature type of moral thinking that most kids progress to is a kind of Kantian stage, where they reason about morality in terms of abstract principles. And this paper, at the time, was the beginning of a kind of paradigm shift towards emphasizing the role of emotions in moral judgment. It also introduces an important idea that we'll be spending a lot of time on in Unit 3, and that's dual process models. So these types of models are ubiquitous in psychology. Cognitive psychology, social psychology, you'll see them all over the place. There's two systems, different names for them, sometimes called System 1 and 2. Haidt calls them the intuitive system and the reasoning system. The psychologist Danny Kahneman, who we talked about back in Unit 1, was someone who popularized this, which is how many know the book Thinking Fast and Slow? 2.5, 3. Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, popularized this idea that there are two systems, one of which is quick and intuitive, one of which is slow and deliberative. Now, there's actually some recent work that you don't have to know about arguing that it may not be so much about speed, but about different types of thinking. But there's definitely something to this. There are different ways of thinking about problems. One which is going with your gut, and one which is thinking carefully about the judgment. And so in Unit 3, when we look at Joshua Green is going to emphasize more the ways in which System 2 can correct System 1. So reasoning actually can change our judgments. Whereas Haidt thinks System 2 is primarily for defense. It's for defending the judgment you already have. So what sorts of motivations inform the first system, the intuitive system? Haidt gives a number of examples. Two that I've listed in the key terms are relatedness motives and coherence motives. So relatedness means you want to be in good standing with the people in your group. We are motivated to make judgments. This is like getting into peer pressure, right? We want to give judgments that help us stay in good standing with other people. Coherence motives, this is one where if you were going to push back against Haidt, you could say that reasoning could get a foothold here. We are motivated to be consistent. So think of the work you learned about an intro site about cognitive dissonance. When we notice an inconsistency between two different attitudes, that feels unpleasant, right? We have an emotional response to that, and we have a motivation to make them consistent. Yep.
Sorry, you said these two motives are part of the intuitive system?
Yes. These are part of what motivate us to arrive at different sorts of judgments. One case of brain damage that helps bring out how this works, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about Joshua Green. There's a part of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is a part of the frontal cortex that has a lot of connections to the limbic system. And to put it crudely, what it seems to be responsible for is attaching value to different courses of action. So the limbic system, regions like the amygdala are kind of like alarm bells. They may, produce an emotional reaction, and that sends signals to the VMPFC, which then says, this action is dangerous, don't do it, or this action, will result in a consequence I don't like, don't do that. And when people with damage to this part of the brain, if you give them kind of gambling type tasks where they have to learn what the most strategic choice is, they can rationally learn, this strategy will make me more money, but they don't do it as much. And what seems to be going on is they're unable to be motivated by the understanding that such and such an action will have a bad consequence. So again, this speaks to the importance of emotion for in that case, it's decision making that has to do with prudential value, not moral value, but there's similar findings in the moral sphere that we'll talk more about in Unit 3. I'm going to say don't worry about the term acquired sociopathy. The paper concludes with some predictions. This is a good thing to start practice thinking about, right? Because the paper draft is due after the end of Unit 3. And one good thing to start to get in the habit of doing is ask yourself, okay, if this model is true, what would follow from it? That may help you with your research proposal. So one thing that Haidt says is, if my model is right, interfering with the ability to reason should affect the quality of the arguments, but not the judgment. So there's different ways of doing this. You can give people cognitive load, for example. So they have to memorize a 7-digit number, and then they do something. So their frontal lobes are kind of distracted. They can't concentrate too hard on thinking of reasons. And so what Haidt is saying here is, if you do that, they should be less able to give arguments for their views, but it shouldn't change their views, because reasoning isn't why they have their views. Another standard by which to judge Haidt's model is whether or not it promotes consilience. He says this at the end of the paper. So this is a term that comes from the biologist E.O. Wilson. Consilience means integrating different levels of science. So this is very important in psychology. We want the models we have to be consistent with more fundamental sciences like neuroscience, evolutionary biology, and so on. So Haidt says, to the extent that my model promotes integration between moral psychology and neuroscience and evolutionary biology, that's brownie points for the model. If it doesn't promote that, that's demerit, bad points for the model. Yep.
Could you please just repeat the earlier thing, not the consilience, the thing before that?
Yeah, the prediction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the prediction is if you interfere with people's ability. So think about how Haidt's model works, right? So there's, intuition or emotion that produces a moral judgment. So think of the incest case, right? The intuition is no. That we form the judgment that is morally wrong, and then we engage in reasoning. But the reasoning is post hoc, right? It's not why we have this judgment. It's just defending it. So if you interfere with this by giving someone cognitive load, for example, what Haidt says is if this is right, it shouldn't change the judgment. They should still say incest is wrong. They just will be less good at giving reasons for it. So that's a prediction that follows from the model. Any other questions? Yeah.
For the earlier thing, for the gambling example you gave,
Yeah.
so you said they can figure out what to do to get the most money, but why don't they do it?
They don't do it because they can't attach value to the different choices. They can't sort of feel that, oh, if I do this, I will lose money and that will suck. The VMPFC does that. It attaches value to different actions. To put it sort of simplistically. Okay, we are almost out of time. That's, I think, a natural place to stop. So we'll finish up the material for Unit 3 next class. Unit 2. So.